Welcome to Fronteras, Changing America. On the program, Kevin Huckabee, an El Paso father turned advocate. We'll talk to him about his dealings with the Mexican government. Plus, we'll talk about his plans to work with lawmakers on this side of the border. And he'll share his views on Ciudad Juarez and why he's warning Americans to stay away. But first, Kevin Huckabee is facing a fight he thought he'd never encounter, the battle over his son, Shohn. It's been a tough journey, but the road to freedom is far from over. For the last 16 months, Shohn Huckabee, a business owner in El Paso, has been locked up, put in a Mexican jail for a crime the family says he never committed.
He was imprisoned, taken by the Mexican military, and has really had very little chance to defend himself. He's at the time he was imprisoned, he didn't speak Spanish, and he's in a country where they, just presume that you're guilty, and it's up to you to try to figure a way out to show them you're innocent. And in their society, in their system, it's near impossible to do.
But it's a case Shohn's father, Kevin, is working hard to win. He feels his son was at the wrong place at the wrong time.
He was in Mexico to get some work done on a truck. He had a business in El Paso, a construction business. And the way the business has been, every dollar counts, and so he was trying to get it done a little less expensively. And so he went over to Juarez to get some work done on it. And on their way back, they were run off the road right in front of the international bridge. Convoy of soldiers, two of them approached the vehicle and jerked him out of the vehicle just shortly after they said something to him.
According to Shohn, the Mexican soldiers pulled his shirt over his head, robbed him of everything he had, and forced him onto a military base where he was beaten for several hours. But it wasn't until 24 hours later when Shohn learned the real reason why the military had him in custody.
These soldiers were charged with finding drug crimes, and things in Juarez have just gone haywire in the last couple of years since the soldiers were there. I don't know how many they have to find a day or what it is, but I've found all kinds of innocent men out in the prison that have never even so much as smoked a cigarette, much less marijuana, and one man was convicted of having 3 tons.
Shohn Huckabee and his friend Carlos Correa, who accompanied him back in December of 2009 to Ciudad Juarez, are accused of carrying 115 pounds of marijuana. Now Shohn is working hard to clear his name.
Just almost every day since then, I've been going over there, and I've been going to the courts trying to watch what I could or get some idea what's going on with the courts, watching as much of the proceedings as I could. Of course, the judge doesn't go to the proceedings, and they don't take the person that's being charged to the proceedings, so you really don't know what's going on. It's around a desk usually with a secretary typing, and whatever she gets on the record is what becomes the permanent record that the judge sees. And it isn't always what's said, we found out.
After a judge sentenced the men to 5 years in prison, human rights attorney for the state of Chihuahua, Gustavo de la Rosa Hickerson, stepped in to file an injunction to overturn the decision.
Establecer una falsa acusación.
He says to falsely accuse someone of a crime is violating a person's human rights. De la Rosa Hickerson is also filing charges of human rights abuse, alleging a series of violations committed by members of the Mexican military, including torture.
Hay muchas dudas.
He says there is plenty of doubt surrounding the case of Shohn Huckabee. It's impossible for this American from El Paso, Texas, to have in his possession this amount of drug. It's a complicated case. The Huckabee family recently filed one last appeal. There's also a petition signed by more than 3,000 people, which is being sent to political leaders in the United States, pressuring them to do the right thing by releasing Shohn Huckabee.
We have been able to arrange to get out to the prison and be able to see him. And in fact, in their prison system, they may have a more liberal visitation schedule than they do in the U.S. They keep families involved, and I think the major reason why is because they don't like to provide food and they don't do clothes for them, so you have to do that for anybody that's a prisoner out there. So we take food and clothes to them 3 times a week. I would just caution anybody that sees this about going into Juarez or into Mexico. You really are taking your life into your own hands, literally. Some people don't make it out of it. So just be cautious going in. The U.S. government is not going to be there for you.
Some really strong words. Kevin Huckabee joins me now. And Kevin, do you still feel that way?
Yeah, Carlos, I do, and it's really probably not going to change, and the reason for that is there are some laws against the U.S. government getting involved, and Mexico likes to keep those that way because they don't want the involvement of our government involved with their government and seeing everything that goes on over there. It's so different. I think is probably the reason why the two governments don't operate nearly the same.
Now, we saw a few pictures earlier of Shohn, your son. Tell me a little bit about who he is as a person. What was he like growing up?
Shohn was kind of a quiet kid. He was always real energetic and real enterprising. You know, from the time he was young, he was always looking for something to do to earn a buck or to do something, and you know, he always had a lot of ideas. He had a lawn mowing business that he started. I think he was about 12 years old and just walked up and down the streets mowing yards that he could get people to pay him $5 to do, and he started from there. And then a couple years later, when his sister got a driver's license, he hired her as his driver to be able to go around, and so they expanded their business and they got to work together quite a bit that summer. And he's had something like that going on, you know, most of his life.
So then he went to school in El Paso and started his own business, correct?
Yeah, he did. He started in El Paso, and actually he came up to New Mexico State for a year and a half and went through the engineering department. But you know, he was so ready to get on with life. He talked me into helping him get a business started, and we did that in El Paso, and he got in the construction business and did a variety of different things, but he kind of found that he liked doing the concrete and dirt work mainly was the things he was doing.
And just from talking to people, a lot of people go to Ciudad Juarez, they cross the border because of the economy. They like to take things, or they like to go across the border to get things that are quite inexpensive. And that was the case in your son's when he was dealing with his business.
Yeah, one of the things that is a big difference between the United States and Mexico is the price of repairs on vehicles. Mm-hmm. I have to go down there now, and this last week I had an air conditioner serviced when I was down there, and they told me the repair was going to run over $1,000 in the U.S. It was done for $55 down there. So that's the type of stuff that attracts people to Juarez. And it was the same case in this vehicle repair that he had done, just some tune-ups and things like that to the vehicle. But,
so Shohn went over there to repair his vehicle?
Got off early on a Friday, or they kind of shut down early on a Friday, and instead of going and playing golf like I think is normal sometimes, he and Carlos Correa decided to go over and they went to get the vehicle repaired, and Carlos wanted to go see his grandfather, so he planned a trip to go do that while Shohn was getting the vehicle repaired.
How long were they planning to be in Ciudad Juarez?
Well, they were planning on being back for the evening. Shohn had planned to go shopping with his wife that evening, and of course didn't make that trip. But probably about 5 hours, something of that nature.
Now, we understand from the story earlier that he was somehow run off the road that he was driving, him and Carlos, correct?
Shohn was driving.
Shohn was driving.
Yeah.
And tell me what happened after that.
Well, the soldiers approached the vehicle and speaking in Spanish, ordered them out of the vehicle. Shohn didn't speak Spanish at the time, but Carlos told him, and of course when somebody's got a gun pointed at you, you sort of understand what they mean. But anyway, they got them out of the vehicle, and then they searched them right away, and they pulled their shirts over their heads and actually took everything out of their pockets, including wallets and all of their personal effects, and pulled their shirts over their heads and then threw them in the back of the pickup trucks that the Mexican Army drives around in.
And I understand that they were taken to a military base where they were beaten, correct?
That's right. They were taken to a military base that's south of Juarez. I think they call it the Cuartel. They spent somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. I'm sure it's felt like 4 days, but somewhere in that time range, they estimate.
Now, how long before this situation happened, and the time where you were informed?
We found out early the next morning. Shohn's wife kept trying to find him during the night and didn't want to alarm us. We were out of town, at my grandmother's for a Christmas visit, and she didn't want to alarm us where we were at and because of what we were doing. And so she called early the next morning and said she'd not been able to find him all night, and was very disturbed and worried about him at that time.
What was your first reaction when she called and said, "I haven't heard from him all night"?
Well, it was of horror, actually. She told me that he had gone over for the repair, and that, we had heard bits and pieces of some things going on, but really hadn't paid attention a lot to what was going on in Juarez at the time. I don't think there was a lot in the press about it at that time, or at least I wasn't seeing it. And I follow the newspaper and the news, so I don't think there was a lot of news about it. But horror that, he might have met a bad end.
Yeah. How difficult do you think it is? Share with us what kind of went through your mind as a father.
Well, I guess the only thing that I remember is just desperation at finding him. We started, trying to do the logical things, which took a little while to kick in, but there was quite a drive back, so we were able to use that time to make telephone calls. I called a person that I knew in Juarez and asked him to start going and checking hospitals and police departments and things like that. And so we started doing that, and then I called another friend of mine that I knew did some work in Mexico. He was a major in the Army and worked with Mexican intelligence on high-level projects, and asked his advice. And so he decided that he would take it upon himself, and he called the consulate for us. And we found out that he had been reported there maybe sometime during the night, or maybe early that next morning.
Okay. And when they told you exactly, why they took him into custody, what was going through your
Well,
head?
it was, just pure shock. I mean, we knew it wasn't true. There's just not any way that Shohn was involved in something of that nature. So we knew at that time that there was something wrong and they were making something up.
Okay. And so then Shohn is put in custody. He's in jail. How long has he been there?
He's been in there about 18 months right now. It was right before Christmas of '09, and he's been in the prison in Juarez.
And tell me a little bit about the work that you've been doing from the point where he was put in jail to right now. I know you visit Juarez a couple of times during the week and visit Shohn in jail.
Yeah, we do that. There's at this point there's not a lot of like day-to-day stuff we can do in the legal realm to try to help him, but we have some active things going. We filed for an amparo, and one of the human rights ombudsman in Juarez, Gustavo de la Rosa Hickerson, has helped us with that, been real instrumental. We filed, it's kind of like a writ of habeas corpus. It's when your constitutional rights have been violated. It's called an amparo, and that's the right of a citizen or a person jailed in Mexico to address the court and have those rights addressed.
When you visit Shohn, what's his character like right now?
Well, he's
Like, how do you
he's
see him?
he's upbeat. I mean, he's worried. You can tell, it's taken a toll on him, but he's always been a real survivor, and so he's made the best of his circumstances and made friends in his area. He stays busy. They had a workshop that he was working in, making furniture and stuff, and it burned down a couple of months ago, and the prison decided they weren't going to rebuild it. There were a lot of men that made their livings for their families with projects they would do in there, but Shohn was making some furniture and just odd stuff. And just recently he decided to get back to that, and so he's made a kind of an alliance with one of the guys that had another shop and is in there in his shop working with him.
Now tell us why you visit him every week.
Well, one of the things that we've heard about Mexico is that the prisons do provide food for their people there, but it's not good, and it's certainly not anything that you would want to subsist on. After we went there, we found out, they bring it out in these huge big pans, but they carry them out in wheelbarrows. And, they holler rancho, and, that's where everybody comes and dips their dirty cups and bowls into it, and everybody's kind of like a big feeding frenzy. But it's what a lot of men there have to depend on, so, I don't blame them for that. But we're able to go over and visit with him, and so we take food, and they don't wash their clothes for them. You have to either pay somebody, or I don't know if you can do it yourself, but I think most of the time they pay people to do it. And so we do Shohn's clothes and take those over to him.
Now, is Shohn the only American right now in his cell, or where he's currently located?
No, there are a couple of other Americans, but the ones that I know are ones that have lived on both sides of the border, and and actually have had some life in Mexico or some dealings in Mexico. There's not a lot that are like him. I've not ever seen but one other Anglo man there, and he was taken down to the island prison some time ago.
And then tell us, when this first all happened, you were continuously going to the courts, and you were sitting in on other cases, perhaps Shohn's case, and you were listening. You don't understand Spanish. What's going through your mind? I bet you're frustrated.
Well, it is frustrating because you desperately need to know what's being said, and you're not able to understand it. You can pick up bits and pieces of it, or I've learned to, and I could speak a little bit of Spanish when this started. Some of it you can pick up by body language of what's going on, and like that in any language, I guess. But it's frustrating to see that what I've done to defend against that. We've been able to get some of the transcripts. So as soon as we were able to, we would get those transcripts, and I would try to get them translated if possible. Couldn't pay to get them all translated because there's hundreds of pages. I think it's over 1,200 pages. But parts of it that we thought might be the most important, we would get translated, and that doesn't work well either, because there are very few people that can translate the legal jargon that goes on in the courts, or it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't translate right. So some of the stuff, even when you get it translated, doesn't make sense.
So what happened to Shohn's business in El Paso?
Well,
was that forced to close?
Yeah, it was forced to close. We had some equipment, and we liquidated that, auctioned some of it, and sold some of it, and just did best we could at getting it closed down.
Gotcha. And so when Shohn was traveling to Ciudad Juarez, he was also traveling, as you mentioned, with his friend Carlos.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about him.
I don't know a lot about Carlos other than what I've learned since he's been in jail with Shohn. Carlos is a little bit older than Shohn. He worked for Shohn at the time. And Carlos, at one time, lived in Juarez. His family's from Juarez. And so quite a few years back he lived there, but I think he's been in the United States for some time and is a U.S. citizen. But went over there to visit his grandfather. Just kind of a typical young person in El Paso. It seems just pretty normal. I think he'd like to go out and go to music and dancing and stuff like that. I've heard things about like that. That's how I think Shohn and he met, or maybe at a club there. And I know there's quite a number of kids that run around together, and he was one of those kids that went out and listened to bands, local bands and stuff there.
Now, I can imagine that before this incident, you spoke to Shohn every day, you saw him every day, as well as Carlos and his family. Tell us about the void that you have now.
Well, it's quite a challenge. You just do the best you can with it. We try to make up for it on visiting days when we're there. We stay pretty busy because we have 4 small children and an older daughter. So with that, we've always got a lot going on in our lives, but it doesn't make up for it. It's a void.
Is there a certain time where you get to go visit your son?
Yeah, there's certain days that are visiting days, and then certain times within those days, and we're able to go during those times.
And when you meet each other, are you in a room by yourselves, or do you have to go like where everybody is?
No, it is one of the things that I think the Mexican penal system has an advantage over the U.S. system. They seem to be able to keep the families more involved with that, so they've got like open air areas. It's like a general compound where everybody gets out, and that they're able to go into during the week actually themselves, and they allow the families to go in there, and the men have been able to really make that nice for the families. They've got a duck pond, and murals on the walls for the kids and that kind of stuff, a playground for the kids, because there are unfortunately a lot of families.
What are some of the things that you have maybe picked up or learned from this entire experience, and what have you learned from dealing with the Mexican government?
Well, I have learned that their system is not anything like the U.S. system. We're dealing from a disadvantage because we expected all of it to be very similar to the U.S. system, and their system is, if anything, it's completely opposite of ours, maybe 180 degrees opposite, because they presume everybody to be guilty over there, and they have to prove that they're innocent. And in many cases, it's impossible for these men to do that. If you can imagine being locked up in a prison where you have no access except to a $1 a minute phone, you can talk to a lawyer if you can afford one, or you can take a public defender that's got maybe hundreds of cases, and you just don't get the time with. So it's impossible for these men to defend themselves in that situation. And because they're presumed guilty, they do another thing over there that's just incredible. And if anybody knows anything about Mexico, they will understand this. With the corruption of the police and military and a lot of their government, they presume that the police are given a higher authority than an individual that's testifying. Two things being equal, they'll give more weight to the police officer. And that's not dissimilar to the U.S., but in the U.S., most of the time that's deserved. Over there, you've typically got a government official that's corrupt, a police officer that's corrupt, and they're giving their testimony credence over yours. So it's very difficult.
Now, tell us a little bit about Gustavo that you mentioned earlier. He is a human rights lawyer, and he's helping you out through this case, correct?
Yeah, Gustavo is kind of an anomaly in Juarez. He's one of the government officials that's on the other side. It's one of the good guys. I would, if there's some way to paint his picture. He's very interested in human rights and doing what's right. He's been threatened with his life many times because of that. But he seems to have a heart for it, enough to stand up for it and to continue fighting for human rights.
And I know that you guys are also collecting signatures in a petition that you're showing lawmakers on this side of the border. What do you want them to get from this?
Well, it's taken some time to get the attention, and I think that's probably because the United States is also dealing from a position of weakness, in that they believe things are similar to the U.S. and Mexico. They're told that anyway. The president gets on air and seems to try to make us think that it's the same place. But anyway, it takes a while, I guess, to get our lawmakers to realize that. And I credit the El Paso city government for being one of the first ones to recognize this. Susie Bird, one of the council persons, I talked to about this story, and one of the few people that believed me, off the bat, and they took it upon themselves to enact a resolution, and that resolution has gotten attention in Juarez. I mean, not in Juarez, but about Mexico and about Juarez with our government. And Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson has taken an interest in the case, and not that she wouldn't be interested in all Americans' cases, but you've got a case of torture, allegations of torture, and you've got allegations of misconduct, but miscarriage of justice, not being tried according to standards that you would expect anywhere in the world.
If there are people watching this right now and sitting there thinking, what can I do? What would you say?
Well, I think one of the things to do is to, you could go to the website, freeshohn.com, and sign the petition that's there. If you know of somebody that's over there, you might can help get their story out. There's a number of people in the U.S. that are over there that are suffering the same fate. Policy changes are necessary on our side of the border as well as over there. I think that the way that we handle drug policy has to be changed. That's a lot of what's going on. President Calderon has called this a drug war, and just in essence, you can't fight a war against drugs. They're not something that fights. They're something that people use. They need to redirect this to where you've got more focus on helping people that have substance abuse problems, as opposed to having a military that's going in there and shooting people. That's no way to handle somebody that's sick, is with force.
And I'm sure there's plenty more to come, and we wish you the best of luck, as well as for Shohn and Carlos and his family. Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this entire interview online at krwg.org. While you're there, check out our blog, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. I'm Carlos Correa. Until next time.